I don't usually believe in miracles. Okay, hear me out. I get how that sounds. At the very least, I find the miracles of Jesus immensely frustrating. On the one hand, I love them because they speak of a God who cares about the very real things that people face. I mean, Jesus alleviated the physical sufferings of people around him. He answered their prayerful pleas. But on the other hand, he didn't answer all of them. Once, when people started lining up to receive healing one morning, Jesus just bailed and said he had to go preach the kingdom in another town. And that's frustrating. It can leave you wondering, well, if he can do it, then why didn't he? What are we supposed to do with all of these healing narratives? Surely they serve some purpose that's bigger than, well, sometimes he heals, sometimes he doesn't. You just have to pray and hope for the best. I mean, what is the point of all of these healing stories? To ask it differently, why did the gospel writers like Luke tell this story in this way at this point in his gospel? That's actually a good question. If you go back to the very beginning in the introduction to the Gospel of Luke, the author hints at the answer. He begins by saying, "Since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning." In other words, I did the research, I connected with the eyewitnesses through my connection to the Apostle Paul, so I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught. I know you've heard some things. I know you've been taught some things about Jesus. I want you to have certainty. I want you to have confidence. I want to bolster your faith with facts about Jesus. So I did the research. I interviewed eyewitnesses. I wrote this account so that you can have the confidence you need to put your faith in Jesus. My goal is to show you that you can trust him. For what? Well, you can trust Jesus and what he says about salvation. Salvation is usually confused with the idea of not going to hell when you die, but it's actually so much bigger than that. Salvation is about receiving peace, peace within, peace with others, peace with the dirt you live on, and most importantly, peace with the divine. To illustrate, let's look at a run of those miracle stories in Luke 8, and at one in particular that's helpful. Chapter 8 begins by Jesus telling the parable of the sower, which is a story about multiplying seeds. And the point is that the good soil is people who hear the word of God, a reference to Jesus' own teaching, and then do something with that teaching. What should we do with it? Well, scroll down and look what he says next. Don't hide it under a bushel. Let it shine. What does it mean to let it shine? Well, scroll down. It means that you actually live it out. You don't just listen to what Jesus says, you live it, you put it into practice. But can we trust you, Jesus? I mean, how can we be confident that we should listen to your words about God? How can we know that you know the path to peace within and peace with others and peace with the dirt and the divine? So Luke adds this run of trust me stories. First, Luke tells the story of Jesus calming the wind and the waves, peace with the dirt we live on, peace with nature. Next, Luke tells the story of healing a demon-possessed man, peace within. Then comes our trust me story next. And it's filled with tension. A few opening details to set this incredible tension. Jesus was returning from the other side of the lake where he had healed that demon-possessed man. And he steps off the boat and he's immediately surrounded by a crowd that he had most recently lectured, saying, "Go and do something with what I've given you." They didn't. They were here waiting for more teaching. And boy, if we had time to talk about this. I mean, there's an entire rant in here about our obsession with listening to speakers and podcasts and sermons and lectures and doing nothing with what we've heard. That's the crowd that's surrounding him. And it's the first hints of the tension. Then a man named Jairus, a synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. Whew. Even more tension building here. You've got to imagine, Jesus wants to both A, get away from this crowd, and B, respond to this plea. And at that moment, the author introduces another interruption. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. More on that in a second. But no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. And then Jesus stopped and asked, "Who touched me?" And the disciples attribute it to this large crowd pressing in on him to try and get Jesus to move on. I mean, Jesus, the man with the name and the respectable position in the community, has a dying daughter, and you're telling him to hold on a second because some unnamed, unknown, female nobody who could never have demanded an audience with you, brushed your elbow? A couple of important details you should probably know. First, this unknown, unnamed woman should not have been in that crowd. She had what they referred to as a flow of blood, which is a euphemism for a menstrual malfunction, which in and of itself is a problem, but it created more and more problems. It meant that she was ceremonially unclean, which meant that she's not supposed to participate in religious rituals or communal life. I mean, if you were on your period in those days, according to Leviticus 15, you too would need to separate yourself from others during your flow, and then for a few days after your flow stopped. Them's the rules. Leviticus 15, 25 to 27. You can look it up later. But what if your flow never stops? Never mind 5 to 7 days. What if it's constant? The practical implications go way beyond the physical anguish of it. You can't participate in religious or communal life. You can't go to worship services or enjoy family meals or go out with your friends. You can't do any of the things that bring joy and meaning to your life. You'd be ostracized from your community and separated. Anything you touched, anyone you touched would also be considered unclean and therefore unfit to participate in society, which meant that people would avoid you like the plague. I mean, could you imagine the loneliness? Her entire identity had become her deficiency. According to the law and according to general social norms, she shouldn't have been anywhere near that crowd. But she was desperate. So she reached out and she touched the edge of his cloak. It's a funny word there for edge of his cloak. It's the Greek word kraspedon. It's not just the hem of his jacket. It's a very specific word that refers to the tassels that are woven into the edge of a person's clothing. In Numbers chapter 15, God instructs the Israelites to put these tassels on the edge of their clothing to remind them of the law. The idea was that the tassels would inspire obedience when a person was tempted to stray from the faith. To wear the tassels was a symbol of a person's commitment to righteousness. She literally touched the symbol of Jesus' righteousness and was restored to good health. I mean, that's basically the Christian gospel in a nutshell right there. We could do a sermon on that. When it comes to you and your relationship with God, you're made whole not by your own good works, but by grabbing onto the righteousness of Christ. She was restored by tapping into his righteousness. Anyway, Jesus stops and asks, "Who touched me?" Now, remember the intensity of the situation. A prominent man needs Jesus to come save his daughter, who Luke mentions is, how old? 12 years old. Why does he mention that? Because it heightens the tension even more. What happens to young ladies as they approach the age of 12? Here's a young lady who's about to start receiving her monthly flow, juxtaposed with a woman whose faulty flow has made her an outcast for, how long was it again, Luke? Also 12 years. As long as Jairus' daughter has been alive, this nobody has been a social outcast. So you got to choose, Jesus, the potential and promise of this young life or this unnamed, unknown, unnecessary outcast who shouldn't even be here in the first place. He stops again and asks, "Someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me." And then the woman, seeing that she couldn't go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. Her intention was to go unnoticed. How many times do you go out into public? You go to school. You go out with your friends. How many times do you go and sit down with family around a table and just pray to God that no one notices? That no one notices the way your hand shakes when you lift it, or that no one notices the wobble in your voice because you're so nervous to speak, that no one notices that you're clenching your stomach, that you pray to God that no one notices the tension between you and your spouse, or that no one notices the way that your son isn't quite, you fill in the blank. I hope no one notices. I hope no one sees, because if they really see me, they'll realize I shouldn't be here. Jesus notices. He sees. He's stopping. And if Jesus is right about his own divinity, that means God notices, God sees. God's stopping for you. Who touched me? I felt power go out. Now, in front of the whole crowd, she has to basically explain that she shouldn't be anywhere near this crowd at all. And then she also gets to explain that she's been healed. And Jesus said, "Daughter, your faith has healed you." Daughter. Because you're not just the deficiency that you started this story as. You're someone's daughter, too. I know your dad's not out here begging for me to come and heal you. You've probably been ostracized from him, too. But I'm reinstating your true identity. You don't have to be defined by your deficiency or your disease. Daughter, your faith has healed you. Your faith, your belief that's accompanied by action to hold on to my righteousness, that has made you well. Your faith, not just your listening and then coming back to demand more didactic instructions, your trust in action faith has made you well. Jesus tells her to go in peace. You have peace with God. And now that you're no longer ceremonially unclean, you can be at peace with others too. And now that you are more than just your affliction, you can have peace within. Luke's point is to say to Theophilus, this is what Jesus is like. He stops for the unnamed, the unclean, the unknown. He sees them and gives them peace, not in an artificial sense, but in a very real sense. By stopping and acknowledging her as daughter, he's offering her peace on behalf of her Heavenly Father. By healing her, he's offering her a path to peace with others. And by seeing her and treating her as significant, valuable, as a human being worthy of his time, despite all of the tension in that moment, he communicates to her, you matter, which can bring peace within. That's what Jesus is like, Theophilus. You can trust him for that same peace in your own life. That's the point of these miracle stories. Will Jesus heal your thing? I don't know. I believe that he's God, so I won't rule it out. But can Jesus bring you on a path to peace within, a path to peace with others, the dirt you live on, and definitely a peace with the divine? That I can promise you he will. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.